welcome to episode 142 of The Dive Down, a Magic the Gathering podcast focused on the latest decks, trends, and strategies for the new dad and casual spike. My name is Stanislav here in Chicago, and with me on the line from Denver, Colorado, it's the one and only Shane Beeps.
Stan, it's so comforting to hear your intro. It's just like 136 episodes of the show have been like introed by you. I need it. I need it in my life. I'm so glad you're back.
Thank you.
Also, I've not very prepared very well because I was on vacation until late last night. So I just need you as just like, a guy to bounce ideas off of.
How prepared do you think Stan is at this point for this?
Stan's had all week.
And how about me? What do you think I'm at?
Is that The Godfather?
Also, that's The Godfather, Dave Harburger.
Stan, I knew you were going to be that guy. I want to tell you.
Which guy?
The guy who just loved being a dad so much that it just exudes. This is like, it was my bit to be the dad for a while, and then I knew once you became a dad, you were going to be like the cheerful dad.
Well, I kept making this joke before my paternity leave that I was going on vacation for 3 months, and that's exactly what it's like.
Get out of this town right now.
Here's the catch.
Get out of the city, cousin Larry.
It's a vacation with someone who made a very detailed itinerary, so you don't get any rest, and you have to get up at 3 a.m. to change diapers for whoever you're sharing a hotel room with. But otherwise, I'm having a great time.
It's good. It's also an itinerary they didn't share with you in advance, so you're always disappointing them vaguely. Oh, that's marriage, I guess, more.
And then they start screaming and they turn all red and they spit up milk. But
I want to have that looked at.
That's what happens when you stay at hostels. On this week's episode, we got a new set that we finally got to play with. So we're going to hunt together and explore the impact of Midnight Hunt, the Return to Innistrad, Avacyn's Revenge. Werewolves are back in town.
John Carpenter's Innistrad Midnight Hunt is what I think this set is officially called.
Yeah, we'll start with a little mini breakdown of the weekend's modern challenges. The Saturday one in particular was a real who's who of MTGO killers. And then we'll try to do a little Sleeve Believe Heave. A few decks that have potentially improved or emerged because of the latest set on several formats that we like to play. Before all that, guys, can we housekeep for a minute?
Please.
Have you been keeping your house while you've been so busy?
That's my job, to be honest. I'm on diaper duty and kitchen and cleaning.
I told you would be. I'm glad you did. It's an important thing.
Listen, I'm so good at changing diapers now.
How's the bottle service going? Are you washing the bottles? Are you washing them? Are you doing it? Do you need them?
Is this the episode? Because I'll talk about cleaning bottles if you want, man.
Maybe in the wind down. We'll do that. To wind down a little bit, we talk about cleaning bottles.
Guys, I blocked the parenting channel for a reason. Okay.
You know what else I'm really good at is thanking the newest patrons to join the Dive Down Nation. Shout outs this week go to KCG and Pax Americana. Thank you both so much.
I think I saw Pax Americana at Riot Fest this weekend. They were on right before Rancid.
Wow, that's a good slot.
Yeah.
Did you wear your earplugs, David? How was Rancid? I'm sure loud.
I was nowhere near close enough to be affected by the loudness.
Oh, yeah, that's the way to take in a festival. Also, thanks to the latest reviewer on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, whatever the platform's called, AK Velocity 13. We see you and appreciate it.
And as I mentioned earlier, if you'd like to help support the show, keep it going, keep Stan in baby bottles, keep our editor Tanner in baby bottles, check us out at patreon.com/thedivedown, where even $1 an episode will get you access to the definitively discreet Dive Down Discord, where you can come and talk about all the formats you like. We recently split off a couple of more Magic formats into their own channels. Modern, Pioneer, Historic, and EDH are the most popular ones. But we gave Standard a channel. People seemed happy that Eldraine had rotated out, so we made a Standard channel. Some people are trying to do that. We made a new fully dedicated Limited channel as well, which was kind of lumped in together. So there's all kinds of things. Whatever you're playing right now, someone is going to be there to question the decisions you've made. Not us, but...
Hey, look, don't say we don't react to listener feedback and suggestions.
Mm-hmm.
We're all about it.
The suggestion was to have a Discord channel for us to never talk about Standard or Limited on the show, and we hear you loudly.
So patreon.com/thedivedown. I think Dave mentioned it. We are also supported by Mana Traders, manatraders.com, coupon code TheDiveDown2021, all smushed together. It gets you 15% off your first 2 months. We use them. We enjoy them. They are a loyal partner many, many months now. So thank you, Mana Traders, and please feel free to use them and our code. for your online rental needs.
Thank you, gentlemen. With all that out of the way, I believe it's Dave on the news desk this week, live from the internet. Dave, what do you have for us?
I mean, it's a new format. It's a new set. The cards became available to people on Wednesday of last week, I think, on Moto is when they started showing up there. And so, of course, we had lots of people streaming, playing with the new Innistrad Midnight Hunt cards, all of that kind of stuff. And we got some interesting results from the Modern Challenges this weekend. So wanted to talk about those two events quickly. Once again, thanks to the early heads up for sharing top eights full day before Wizards does by Bamzing. Check out Bamzing's great write-ups on Reddit. Always helpful. And of course, thanks to Wizards of the Coast for sharing these lists at all. I don't want to beat around the bush on this tournament. So on the Saturday night or Saturday challenge, let's just talk about the top 8. In first place, well-known Magic Online player.
Magic Online user.
Sorry, that's
Magic Online account holder.
That's Everett's bit. I should have come up with something better for Gabe. It's Gabe Nassif. Gabe Nassif won the Modern Challenge on Saturday with Living End. Bob the Dog on Moto. Second place was R. Hotch with Izzet Tempo, which I believe is Murktide. If you look at the actual list, it's Murktide. Watch that naming, everybody. Don't get confused. Third place was Canister with 5-color elementals. Fourth place was Bill's Ive with blue-white control.
He's my favorite science guy.
Okay. Fifth place was Spider Space with a Esper Reanimator deck, let's say. Sixth place was friend of the show. I mean, Spider Space is a friend of the show, but sixth place was also another friend of the show, Everett Mohan, Aspiring Spike on Jeskai Phoenix. That's right, Jeskai Phoenix in the top 8 of a Modern Challenge.
Is it that new Phoenix from Midnight Hunt?
Yep, it's even better. It's actually it's the one from Kanza Tarkir. Seventh place,
Flamewake.
Yeah, Flamewake Phoenix. Thank you, Victor Von Muerte with blue-white control, and in 8th place, Curry _ Mono White or Curryvore online with blue-white Blink, a Yorion deck. So, in case you weren't counting, this top 8 had Gabe Nassif, Canister, Gabriel Maxon, who is Spider Space, and Everett Mohan in the top 8, as well as a couple other people whose names I've recognized in these top 8s before, including Bill's Ive. But we had some of the top Moto grinders all in this one event, all duking it out at the end, and Gabe Nassif came out on top.
Yeah, this is a murderer's row. I would not like to see these people up against me if I happen to randomly make top 8.
These are all the people I just want to awkwardly ask questions of at tournaments. I never want to play them in reality.
So do you think this Gabe Nassif person, do you think they're the real deal? Do you think they have what it takes to keep it up?
These Magic Online results will tell you that.
They just keep stacking up. I'm sure that's what he's measuring it with. So let's go through the highlights of the decks. It was a pretty good spread of different deck types here, including a couple of new ones, a couple old ones, a couple of new ones. But so as I mentioned, Gabe was on Living End, was on the 4 Grief version with 3 also Waker of Waves, which is not a super new card in the deck, but is something that I definitely took note of a little bit because I don't think it's always there. It's a cool card that has a little bit better cycling in some ways because it lets you, when you cycle it, it basically...
So it's 1 in a blue, discard Waker of Waves. Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one of them in your hand, the other into your graveyard. So it's sleight of hand. You pay 2 for a sleight of hand, but you put a 7/7 into the bin.
Yeah, and sleight of hand, you don't put it into your graveyard. You put it on the bottom of your library. So this one, you get to put an extra reanimation or living end target into the graveyard as well. It's a pretty good card. I didn't really see anything too different here, but it's the other thing that's interesting about these decks I didn't realize is that they run a lot of the elementals from Modern Horizons too.
So here's what I'll say about Gabe's deck. Notice this top 8 doesn't have any rhinos, and I think a big part of that is because people are stocking up on Chalice. Sometimes in the main, we see this whole new blue-white control variant emerging, playing main deck Chalices too. And this deck, this Living End deck, is just as vulnerable to Chalice as Rhinos is, because Living End is a 0-mana spell. So being able to dodge that, perhaps in part thanks to the 4 Force of Negation, or even using like Grief to take it out of people's hands on the play, I think is something that has allowed Gabe to actually play around a lot of hate that's in the field right now.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, he's been liking this deck a lot and continuing to win with it because deck's pretty good.
Absolutely. All right. And then in second place, as we said, we had someone on Murktide. Not really anything new in the Murktide deck, honestly. I took a look through. I don't think there's any Innistrad cards in here at all, but it's a solid version of the deck. 3 counter spells, 2 charms, everything else you would imagine here. Running 1 Engineered Explosives main deck, I guess, as a hedge against Footfalls, basically. Maybe a couple of other things. Not like you're going to see food, but maybe a food kind of hedge as well. But pretty normal version of this deck. Third place, Canister with 4-color elementals. So this is a deck that has sort of been on the wane again. And the only thing that I thought was really notable about this one is that this deck, his version this time is running 4 Muldrifters, which I didn't think anybody was doing until I hadn't seen that before. So really intent on drawing a lot of cards on this version.
Elementals is basically the best tribal deck in the format now, right? In the current format?
I mean, the value generated, yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, whenever it was on a few weeks ago, we talked a little bit about how he thinks it kind of felt like he thought Elementals is a deck that's going to kind of go up and down a lot as the meta because it has some really, really good matchups and it has some really not very good matchups. And so seems like maybe this one just got a moment to kind of come in. I mean, one other thing, I know that this deck always ran Teferi Time Raveler as well, but that is a good main deck card against all these Cascade decks as well.
Mm-hmm.
For sure. I mean, this is probably a pretty myopic way to look at this, but Elementals, I think, showed up pretty well this weekend, and I did not see a lot of Tron. There's a single green Tron and a single Eldrazi Tron. I don't think it's as polarized as that, where it's like Elementals can't beat Tron, and Tron always beats Elementals, but I think it's a pretty strong matchup for Tron, and I think if people just decide they don't want to bring it, or maybe it doesn't do well in the Swiss, then Elementals can have more success for sure.
And in fourth place, Bill Zive with Blue-White Control. Now, whenever it was on a couple of weeks ago, he told us that this was a deck that he thought was really real in the meta, that was kind of on the way up. It's not something that I had played against a lot personally, but there are basically 2.5 Blue-White Control decks in this top 8, which is kind of interesting to see. It's the most played archetype in this top 8, essentially. And it's running some new cards, which I think is cool. But the other thing is that one thing that all these blue-white decks have adopted is that they are main deck Chalice of the Void decks, which I think is not something people always think about blue-white being. You see 3 in the main, you see 2 in the main. Haven't seen one with a full play set yet, but this one has its 4th in the sideboard, essentially.
Yeah, it's just like Path to Exile is not really a spell in Modern anymore, for better or for worse. And we have Prismatic Ending that can get around the 1 mana issue. And so why not? The format is so efficient that Chalice effectively can act like a 3-for-1, depending on your opponent's deck and their draws. So play it.
What do you guys think about the format as a whole if main deck Chalice is good, if not necessary? Is it as perhaps like scary or problematic as when the format becomes one where you want to play main deck Surgical?
I think Chalice is easier to destroy, even if you're playing a deck that heavily relies on 1 mana spells, because you can always play something that has an X in the casting cost. You can play something that costs 2 mana that can still get you value. Do you know what I mean? I think it's not quite as ridiculously powerful as something like a main deck Surgical could be, where it's just like, I need to stop graveyard strategies as much as possible, and they're overrunning the meta. I think if Chalice just indicates a highly efficient format, which Modern has become, and I think it's just something we have to acknowledge. I guess I'm just really saying that Chalice is good because the format's efficient, and these decks can make up for that, playing the Chalice in the main deck by just running higher CMC spells, which is surprising. Like, this deck has Cryptic. It's back.
Mm-hmm. This deck has Cryptic. There's a couple other things I wanted to talk about too, and I think we should take a look at the other blue-white lists in a minute, but this deck was the one that was running the most new cards. It was running a single copy of Sunset Revelry main and a second one on the side, replacing Timely Reinforcements, which, if you remember, this card is the generic and a white sorcery from the new set that says, and if an opponent has more life than you, gain 4. If an opponent controls more creatures than you, create 2 1/1 human creature tokens. And if an opponent has more cards in hand than you, draw a card. I thought that was interesting to see. It also has a Fateful Absence in the sideboard, which is something that I had talked about blue-white maybe picking up in order to get rid of planeswalkers that were resolved. Don't know if people think it's good or bad, but it was interesting to see. However, the big card that was in here, which has had a lot of conversation across multiple formats this week, was Memory Deluge. This is a card that Shane made us stop and talk about on the spoiler episode last week, and I'll read it real quick in case you don't remember. Memory Deluge, 2 generic, 2 blue. It's an instant. It says, look at the top X cards of your library, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast this spell. Put 2 of them in your hand and the rest of the bottom of your library in a random order, and it has flashback for 5 generic blue, which means it casts Dig Through Time if you manage to flash it back. Card sweet. I've definitely become more and more interested in having this card around as the week has gone on. I just think a lot of people are finding out that's powerful. It's basically the best kind of pure draw spell at instant speed that I think is available in this kind of big mana version right now, the 4 mana version. But I think it's cool. I was glad to see it. What do you think, Shane? You patting yourself on the back? You break your arm?
Man, this is not my call. This is just a heard it through the grapevine type thing that I just wanted us to point it out in the spoiler rep. But I mean, I don't know. Just like a few weeks ago, we have the folks from Mishra's Babylon, and they're saying blue-white control is not really playable, cryptic command is not really playable. That's what the format feels like. It's not just them saying, like, these are our hot takes. It just felt like that. And all of a sudden, what does it take for a deck like this to somehow be runnable? And maybe it's just the right build, where it's like, hey, we're going to lean heavily into Solitude. We're going to play 4 Solitudes to have some really efficient ways to take care of early creatures. We have our prismatic ending and counter spells, of course. But then we just quickly pick up the speed into Archmage's Charm at 3 mana and Cryptic Command at 4 and Memory Deluge at 4 and Supreme Verdict at 4. So it's like this deck does have to figure out a way to survive into the mid and late game. And I'm still honestly surprised in today's meta, in today's modern, that this is enough to do it.
Well, you also have Hall of Storm's Giants.
Yes.
That's really all you need.
I did want to talk about that card for a minute.
Those are cool lands, honestly.
I know. I really need to get some of those. I haven't opened a single pack of the Dungeons & Dragons set. I need to get the red one, and Hall of Storm Giants seems awesome. Hall of Storm Giants is the blue creature land. It's the one that if you control 2 or more other lands, it enters the battlefield tapped, add blue. 5 generic and a blue. Until end of turn, Hall of Storm Giants becomes a 7/7 blue giant creature with ward 3. That is a beater. Who cares if it doesn't have flying, I guess. Mm-hmm. We want this and not Celestial Colonnade because it comes into play untapped sometimes, which I think makes a lot of sense. Let's talk about the other couple of blue-white control decks that are here. The 7th place deck is a much more kind of standard version of this deck. It doesn't have any new cards. It's running Factor Fiction, but it's still running 4 Archmage Charm, 4 counterspells. So it's got the full complement of counterspells. And the other card that goes in all these decks, which is 4 Prismatic Ending. It's running 2 Chalice of the Void and Shark Typhoon. Like, that's your core, basically, of this. And this deck is doing it. That is Victor Von Muerte's deck that came in 7th.
Dave Davis has 3 Celestial Colonnade.
Oh, this one does? I did not notice that. Look at that.
Your tower friend is back. Spires? What are those things? Columns?
They're colonnades. I gotta say, I am more intrigued with having a land that occasionally comes in untapped when it really matters. So I don't know if that's the right one to run anymore, but it's nice to see it there. I'm gonna give it a nice like tip of the old hat as we go by Celestial Colonnade here. This deck also had more Planeswalkers. It had a Jace. The other deck did not have Jace. All those kind of things. The 8th place deck is the one I want to talk about really quickly while we're doing blue-white stuff from Curryvore. This deck is sort of Chalice control. It has 3 Chalices. It's got your Archmage's Charms, your counterspells. It's running 4 Dovin's Vetoes. Part of that is because it's an 80-card deck because it's a Yorion build, which I think is super fascinating. So it's got Solitude. It's got Spreading Seas. It's got your Wall of Omens, all of your like flash targets. It's even running 4 Restoration Angel, which is sort of one of those things where I'm like, that's a name I haven't heard around here in 40 years, Resto's a cool card, but I did not see that coming. And then, this one is also running 3 Celestial Colonnade as part of its package too, along with a few other things. It's actually even running a Hengegate pathway, a blue-white pathway, which is sweet. Good on ya. This deck was cool too. It was interesting to see sort of more grindy and with more threats version of this Chalice control build. Put up some good results.
I also noticed that a lot of these blue-white decks, if not all of them, are playing Mystic Gate, which is, the blue-white filter land, which seems maybe increasingly important if you're playing like Crypt Counterspell and Archmage's Charm and even Cryptic Commands.
Yeah.
Into Supreme Verdict with double white.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. This deck is weirdly a little lower to the ground. It doesn't have any for CMC instance It doesn't have any cryptic. It doesn't have any memory deluge. It doesn't have any of that kind of stuff. It does have lower cost spells, but it's got a lot of stuff that it needs to get done. So Mysticate still makes sense, I think, here too. All right, Shane, if you were going to torture yourself, which one of these blue-white control decks would you go for? You go for the Yorion deck?
No, I cannot do Yorion decks. I mean, the fourth place one seems like it does the most with like the curve, where it's just like, hey, I max out at 4 mana or 5 mana with Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. Solitude, I think, is a house. I think Solitude is still like a card that people are learning how good it is, and this one runs, I think, 4 versus the other decks running 2 each, I believe. Mm-hmm. I don't know. I don't think I can ever play a Celestial Colonnade in my life. I'd rather play Call of the Storm Giants.
That does it for him.
Yeah, that's all I need.
Stan, are any of these interesting to you? You're known to play some blue-white occasionally.
These blue-white decks, the Murktide deck is really more my speed.
Yep, this is true. Well, let's talk about what's really more Shane's speed, which is in 5th place, we had Gabe Maxon, Spider Space, Esper Reanimator. Shane, this is your thing lately, yeah?
Yeah, that's my thing. Yeah, I mean, I've been
Orzhov Reanimator anyway.
Yeah, I've been focusing on Orzhov Reanimator for like, I don't know, 6-7 weeks now, which is a long time. So you know what? We're gonna talk about this one in the old dive down. So bookmark this deck, gentlemen.
I'm just going to say really quick, what makes it no longer Orzhov, of course, is Faithful Mending and Consider are the cards that people are really looking at running in decks like this. You know what Faithful Mending is. We'll talk about it more in the dive down, as Shane said, and also Consider. We'll talk about it more, but that's the new cantrip that everybody loves. And that's enough to pull this deck into blue and away from being just black-white. Similarly, as we mentioned, Everett was on a Jeskai Phoenix deck. So one of the first times we've seen that really come together well. Normally, of course, Phoenix was either mono red or Izzet, very, very occasionally Teamer. And this deck has Arclight Phoenix coming back. It's got Faithful Mending, Faithless Salvaging, and Consider, all as important pieces of the instant suite and new pieces of the instant suite. It's got 4 Prismatic Ending, and it has 4 Demi-Lich as the secondary threat within the deck.
I don't like Demi-Lich's teeth. I don't like it.
You don't like it?
They're like diamonds, right?
The teeth are creepy.
They are weird.
It's like Legend of the Crystal Skull.
Is that a Nickelodeon TV show?
No, it's the best Indiana Jones movie.
Oh, okay.
Did you guys ever know, though, that company that used to make all those hip-hop record covers, Pen and Pixel Studio? Did you ever check them out like 15 years ago? They had this incredible website that was just like, you would buy this package for an album cover and all this stuff that came with it. But anyway, that's what this reminds me of, is like that style of mid-early 2000s, like Photoshop hip hop art for some reason. But so this deck is the deck. This is the deck that I played this week, and so we'll of course spend a lot of time talking about this in the dive down. I guess the only thing I could say about this deck is I don't know why these are Demi-Liches and not full liches, because they are very good. Okay, and we already talked about the 7th place deck and the 8th place deck.
Yeah.
So what do you all think about this top 8?
Looks like good decks.
Magic is fun.
Mm-hmm. Stan, you've been away from Modern for a minute.
Right.
Which one of these decks would you want to hop on? Would you stick with Murktide, as you said, or would you be looking at Phoenix? Where's your mind at?
Well, I have been watching streamers a little bit, especially because friend of the show, the Pen Sword, is back, and he's got this new Blue Moon Brood that I'm dying to play, but
yeah, it destroyed me on Friday night. By the way, I played against Jacob, and he was very nice, and then he killed me. And I actually went to time because I was having computer problems as well. So he destroyed me, and I wasted his evening. Sorry.
Yeah, deck looks awesome. Fire Ice is bugged on MTGO, though, where you can't flash it back with Snapcaster Mage. So I can't bring myself to actually register that deck in an event, or a league, rather, unless, I would put it together in paper, but I don't want to play a bug deck on MTGO right now.
Mm-hmm. Is where your heart is. Totally understand. All right, the last couple things I wanted to talk about this event was, looking at the extended top 32, the number one deck on the list, in my mind anyway, when I looked at the breakdown, was Hammer Time. But if you bunch up blue-white control into a single archetype, as they do on Goldfish for this event, you get 5 or 15% of the top 32 metagame was blue-white control. But Hammer Time and Burn were both really big here with 3 entries apiece. Neither one of them made a top 8, which I thought was really interesting. Additionally, there were 12 decks out of this list that had Luris as their companion, from what I saw. Mm-hmm. And not a single one of those made the top 8 either. So I don't know if that was just timing or if that was something else, but pretty interesting. there.
Dave, we also have Sunday's challenge.
Yeah, why don't we take a look at that?
Yeah, want me to breeze through this?
Please.
Take a load off you. Take the load off, rather. Okay, so we'll go through more quickly through this one because it's a little bit more straightforward. Not as many curveballs. We've got Sejemba on 4-color elementals with Kahira, Meme Brand on mono red Eldrazi. This is not typical. Let's talk about this now. Why not? So this is kind of what you would expect. I mean, I don't know. Like, it's just like it's good red cards, right? We've got Ragavan and Bone Crusher and Matter Reshaper, Thought Not Seer, Reality Smasher. The red adds Fury, of course, and Eldrazi Obligator, which is a card that you just continually see showing up and doing some stuff. We've seen it in Pioneer, we've seen it in Modern from time to time, and it's a 2 and a red for a 3/1 with haste. But when you cast it, you can pay 1 and a true colorless. If you do, you gain control of a target. You basically get a threatened effect. You gain control of a target creature and untaps, and it gains haste and end of turn.
And Obligator also has haste.
Yes. So you can have a pretty big swing if you have access to just 5 mana, one of it being true colorless, which this deck probably would. And you add on some Abrade, some Shatter Skull Smashing, some Dismember, 4 Chalice, because this has only a single 1-drop in Ragavan. Mm-hmm. I'm still surprised that it's going to commit that hard to it, but if it's an Eldrazi Tron style deck, you're going to play Chalice of the Void. This has a couple Den of the Bugbear main, which is a cool card, and the usual kind of things you might expect. So anyway, it's a red, aggressive, Eldrazi focused deck. So sweet.
This deck is wonderful.
Wonderful deck.
I can't believe that this deck just like shows up every once in a while. You know what I mean?
It does, friend.
Look at how many new cards are in this version of it, though. Like the version that we, like I haven't seen this deck, I feel like in 2 years or a year and a half. And it's like, oh yeah, we could play Bone Crusher Giant and Ragavan and Fury.
And Den of the Bugbear.
And Shatter Skull Smashing. Like these all seem like good cards in this style of deck. So I was like kind of really intrigued to see this.
Yeah, cool deck. Third place is a Murktide Izzet deck. Fourth place, Demonic Tutors, who's been doing really well with Yawgmoth, shows up in fourth. Fifth place, Coco Lopez on Blue-White Control, featuring main deck Rest in Peace to go along with their Memory Deluge. That seems like a rough one, but sometimes just drawing 4 cards and picking 2 of them or getting 1 of them is good enough, I guess. Sixth place, this is a Titan build. Just looks like a, usual old Amulet Titan good stuff. Seventh place, this is Living End by Oskia. Eighth place, Norath Decay on Boros Burn.
This is actually a lot of well-known streamers too. Oskia is pretty well-known. North Decay is someone who shows up a lot. Demonic Tutors, like you mentioned. So there's a bunch of people on this one as well.
I looked through the rest of the top 32 for anything that looked interesting. I didn't find any cool decks Inc., but Stan, you got anything?
Well, this 8th place burn deck playing 2 main deck Roiling Vortex. That's a decision.
Wow.
Also a main deck Deflecting Palm.
I know. I did notice this when I saw the deck list on Twitter, actually, because this player posted it. And I was like, main deck Deflecting Palm, huh? Really interesting. I got to think that's some kind of like, is that like Murktide tech of some kind? Like you're going to swing in and hit me with your giant thing and I'm just going to get you back? Like
Maybe like a single creature from Living End.
Yeah, that could help save you too and then kill your opponent as well. Like definitely.
Burn was actually all over this top 32. There was 5 burn decks that I noticed. The 4th most played creature was Eidolon of the Great Rebel. So why not?
Rolling Vortex is an interesting choice for a deck that doesn't want to play Chalice to have something that just hurts decks that are cascading. You get some incremental value from people casting whatever Gut Shot occasionally or something like that. But on the other hand, you also get it off of a cascade trigger too. So,
and in Shane's financial corner, I will mention there are 32 copies of Fury, across this top 32. That's the most played creature, more than Endurance, more than Solitude, more than anything. It is currently like $14, $16, something like that. Just that's all I'm going to say. It's gone down from its peak after its rise, so this card is not going anywhere.
That's a card we bought low. I feel like I got mine for like $4 or $5.
Yep, buy low, sell high. I'm not selling mine, so don't worry. You're going to buy other people's.
This card was $26 6 weeks ago or so. That's wild.
Yeah, it had a blip. When it went up. So buy back in. That's my finance tip.
Should we do a bonus episode where we review the film Fury?
Sure.
The top 3 cards played in this were, you mentioned that Eidolon of the Great Revel was the 4th most played card, but the top 3 creatures played in this event were Fury with 32 copies in the top 32, Endurance with 30 copies in the top 32, and Solitude with 28 copies in the top 32.
Turns out free spells can be good.
Yep, and Ornithopter's on this list too. So 4 of them are free spells.
All right, so we spent a lot of time on this, but I did want to call out one cool deck ink at least, and that is Jund Sacrifice, piloted to a 32nd place finish by the great Pablo on Saturday's challenge. Calling out this deck because it's been kicking around a little bit, and this was something that Spike has been playing. He was playing it late in his trophy run last season.
He was literally playing that at the end of the night when he was trying to catch up.
Yeah, he was like, this deck is good and people aren't ready for it. Jund Sacrifice, it's not just for Historic anymore. The major sack payoffs here are, of course, Mayhem Devil and Goblin Bombardment, which is the classic card reprinted into Modern in Horizons 2. People were interested in these Bombardment decks and Bombardment as an engine, and this appears to kind of be a viable one. That's the one in the red enchantment that reads, sacrifice a creature, it deals 1 damage to any target. Clean and simple. And then Mayhem Devil, if you haven't played Historic, is 1 red-black for a 3/3 devil that reads, whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, it deals 1 damage to any target. So, peas and carrots, y'all. Playing, you pay the sacrifice cost on Bombardment, it deals 1 damage. The triggered ability of Mayhem Devil goes off as well, so you're dealing 2 damage if it's a sacrifice creature. And then Mayhem Devil, of course, triggers from all sorts of things that are happening in Modern. You're sacrificing a fetch land, you're sacrificing your Ragavan treasure tokens, you have to sacrifice most of your graveyard hate artifacts. Kroxa, when it's not escaped, is a sacrifice trigger.
Grist has a sacrifice trigger. It's -2 is sacrifice a creature.
Yep. Not only your triggers matter too, so it's whenever anything on any side of the battlefield is sacrificing, Mayhem Devil's going off. And people don't have a lot of experience playing around Mayhem Devil at all in Modern. People were just either not playing around it, they felt they couldn't, they just didn't seem like they had a lot of awareness that Mayhem Devil was going to trigger when they're doing things. And then, of course, this deck has low to the ground stuff like Ragavan and Ignoble and Bloodghast for a recursive sack engine and getting in that hasty damage. It's got your Seasoned Pyromancer for value and sacrifice fodder. And of course, Mayhem Devil, it's got Wrenn and 6 for power and recursive fetch land triggers. You get a land back every turn, and you sacrifice it. That's just an extra point of damage you can deal. It's got Grist, like Dave was saying, makes creature tokens for sacrificing, and also allows you to sack them for value. Unearth is in there, gets you back a needed engine piece, or even a Grist, and has Coco for value. It's a math-heavy deck, where I think you can sort of just be count. Oh, I have 10 damage. And then I have lethal. You get a lot of value out of all of these pieces, and I think if you like that style of deck, if you're a Yawgmoth fan, or if you like playing this in Historic, I think this deck looks legitimate, and it looks like a deck that would be fun to play.
Wow, this deck is 1,100 tickets on Moto.
Can I throw a quick deck at you guys from Saturday?
Yeah.
Oh, please.
15th place, Free Loot, 93, Suracer on Gruul Ponza. But it's the craziest version of Ponza I've ever seen in my life.
All right, let's hear why.
It has Utopia Sprawl. It does not have Arbor Elf. Instead, the 1-drop slot is Ragavan. It has main deck Colossus, which is pretty typical, coupled with main deck for Tarmogoyf, which is just a crazy, non-bow traditionally. Yeah. Colossus is the Goyf killer.
It's also got 3 Wrenn and 6 that people don't always run in Ponza too, right?
Yeah, that's actually not atypical for Ponza to have 1 to 3. But it's really the lack of Arbor Elf and the addition of Tarmogoyf that I thought was wild.
And remember Scavenging Ooze? It's back. Here's a playset. I was just lamenting how Scavenging Ooze has just kind of fallen off Modern's map, but not in every deck.
Yeah, plus a couple Carpollution Forest.
I saw a playset of it in a traditional Jund deck, too, that top 32.
Oh yeah, Jund. What a concept.
That's cool. And then one last deck. Shane, I think this one is worth talking about. So 24th place on Saturday was a Dredge deck.
Sure was. Fujisan, running all 5 colors.
Perfect.
Silver Smoke Ghoul version. And it was not running all 5 colors for Faithful Mending. It was, in fact, running it for Otherworldly Gaze.
Oh,
yes.
It's a blue instant. Looks at the top 3 cards of your library. Put any number of them into your graveyard. The rest back on top of your library in any order. Then you can flash back over for one in the blue. Yes, the card I said did not dredge. Yet here we are. It dredged. Perhaps it still doesn't dredge. But I mean, this player certainly tested it. They certainly did okay. They went 4-3. This is not like breaking down the doors of Modern, but this person did do it in a challenge, which is something that I have not done.
Yet.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like a lot of dredge decks, but they made room for it with 1 Shriekhorn, only ran 2 Life from the Loam. Then they went for like the 4 Otherworldly Gaze, 4 Cathartic, 4 Thrilling Discovery. That is some mana requirements. And then I'm looking at the deck list and the mana base, and I'm kind of amazed it works. But that's me in every deck I look at in Modern because I find this mana interesting. Not as many Rainbow Lands as I would have guessed. I think it's relying heavily like on a fetch shock kind of scenario. But then, I don't know how it's working, but it did. I will also note that the only way this deck gains 3 life is with Creeping Chill. It doesn't have like Helix, the flashbackable Helix type thing. Is this a new way to build dredge? We will see. I think this is definitely not the first time we will see people playing with and perhaps winning with Otherworldly Gaze, but I don't know.
Can we talk about budget decks in Modern for a second online?
I mean, that's our thing.
Yeah, it is our thing. No, if you want to play a budget deck on Moto, look at the cost of dredge. On Moto, on Goldfish, I'm looking at it right now, it's 86 tickets for this entire deck list with everything, all the fetches, everything that's in here.
Wow.
That's cheap. If you're someone who just wants to buy a Moto deck, like a good competitive Magic Online deck and grind it, I think you probably can't do much better than 90 tickets for dredge. But okay.
Huh. Well, that ends your so-called mini breakdown, Stan. They're never mini.
They are never mini.
I didn't write that. I just read what's in front of me. You guys populate the teleprompter, and I say what I'm told to say.
I'm Ron Burgundy.
All right. Well, stay with us. We're going to dive into 3 specific decks, and I have a feeling that we're going to talk a lot about 2 particular cards this week. Consider and Faithful Mending, I think, are going to come up a lot. We'll see. All right. Stay with us.
And we're back. Guys, we haven't done a Sleeve Believe Heave formally in a while. I think we should start with a quick recap of that format, our patented format.
Yeah. So every time a new set comes out, we try to look at the lists that emerge or are heavily influenced by new cards from the set and do a little segment that we call Sleeve Believe Heave, which is where we look at new decks and we rate them as to something we would like to play, will definitely play and will be around. We call that a sleeve. Something that we think will be around and think is okay. We think it's a real deck, but we're not sure that it's like a must do. That's a believe. And then Heave is we never want to see it again. We're not going to play it anymore. We're going to throw it out of the window right now.
And just to remind some longtime listeners of our track records, our Heave decks include 5-color Niv Mizzet.
Hey, that was before Modern Horizons came out, okay? That was before Arkham's Astrolabe. It was before some other cards that were important to that deck.
Yeah. I think we were a sleeve on Hammer Time, maybe? Does that sound right?
I don't know. That was a whole episode.
I don't know.
We did an early episode on Hammer
Our track
Time.
record with these decks is great.
It's 100%. We're perfect at evaluating decks.
So this set is really new, and generally we give another week before we do a Sleeve Believe Heave, but it felt like there was enough stuff showing up in Modern in particular. I know there's some stuff going on in Historic that Stan has seen, so we felt like there was enough to talk about, and in fact I think that it's really actually 2 cards that we're going to spend most of our time talking about. Like I said before the break, I think that there's been a ton of influence on both Modern and Historic from Faithful Mending and Consider when it comes to revitalizing or maybe making powerful decks that are already there or just totally doing new things. And so I thought I would really quickly read these 2 cards in case you forgot what they do. Faithful Mending is a blue and a white, and it's not in front of me right now, but what it says is gain 2 life, and then you can draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. It is an instant, and it has flashback 1 generic blue-white. That's right. It's Faithless Looting for an extra mana in a gold card in very different colors from what it used to be in. And it's an instant, which is wild, as it turns out. And then Consider is a card that we've talked about a little bit, but it is basically says Surveil 1, draw a card. Consider is look at the top card of your library. You can put it in the graveyard if you want to, and then draw a card. You put it in the graveyard or put it on top of your library and draw a card. Very strong blue cantrip that I think a lot of people are excited to play with. So I thought that what we would do is take a look at the sort of graveyard-based decks that it has helped enabled, and one top of the library deck that it's helped enable as well. I think where we should start is let Shane talk about Esper Reanimator. I played Jeskai Phoenix, as we mentioned earlier, and Stan, what did you play?
I played some, I mostly stuck to historic, but I played both Izzet Phoenix and a lot of Izzet Delver.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Ugh. Yeah, you know what's good about letting me or making me go first, at least, is that we understand the time frame we have to work with after I'm done.
That's true. Because I'm sure because your notes are so extensive this time, you're going to go for like 30 minutes, like you always do.
There's at least 1 page of notes. I'm also good at winging it.
Yeah, that's what I meant. You're very good at winging it.
Okay, so Spider Space, friend of the pod, Gabe Maxon. He ran this deck that I played this week out to that 5th place finish we mentioned in the breakdown Saturday's challenge. He only lost in the Swiss to that other Gabe Nassif, and then lost in the quarterfinals, getting him to 5th place. So if you aren't aware, I've been playing a lot of Orzhov Reanimator lately. I've been taking it to the LGS the few times I can get there. I've been doing just a random match here and there in the tournament practice room, and just been sort of tweaking it and philosophizing about it, and just going over the sideboard and the main deck with people in the Discord, trying to get as much testing as I can, because whatever reason, I'm really liking this deck, and I'm having a pretty good winning percentage with it. I've had a couple 3-1s at the store. It's felt pretty great on Magic Online much of the time. Of course, there's some bad matchups, but overall, I think it's cool. I think it's a little bit underexplored. But Shane, you hated this deck.
Shane, I swear you hated this deck.
Well, it's not. That was this deck. I mean, that was that deck. This is a different animal, at least a little bit of a different animal, because the version that I was testing out was like the sort of Grief Ephemerate thing, where it had the sideboard Stoneforge package for kind of like the avoiding the graveyard hate juke and things like that. And I have tweaked it over time to just throw that Grief stuff out. I never found it was worth the deck slots, and I never felt it was worth the going down a card to exile, because you don't, if you discarded the card to Grief, sweet, perfect. That would be amazing.
Broken,
but no, you exile.
Okay.
It. Yeah, that'd be bonkers. So I just moved Stoneforge into the main, along with Cauldra and Batterskull, and also 3 Inquisitions, along with the 4 Thoughtseize, and that has been really worthwhile. Like, having all that hand disruption is basically like an built-in way to protect what you're about to do. And then Stoneforge gives you that built-in threat package that the opponent has to worry about along with your reanimation shenanigans. And that's been working really well for me. But that's enough about that, perhaps.
Yeah, and so along came Innistrad Midnight Hunt to take a deck that you liked and turn it into something that you probably hate.
But I feel obligated to try.
Let me ask you about some cards, Shane, because if there's nothing that everybody knows on the dive down, all of our listeners know, it's that one thing that Shane loves is blue cards. Loves blue cards. So let's talk about the cards that are in this deck. How do you like Teferi Time Raveler? Is that a card you've ever played before?
Yeah, I have played with this card, but never in like a traditional controlling style deck, besides maybe we tested for like the show or something like that. I played it like in some, remember that weird shortly lived like creature combo Bant deck where like it was there to just sort of provide value and like bounce Oath of Nissa and stuff like that. I think maybe that had Astrolabe, I'm not sure. But I mean, I like Teferi is one of those cards where it's like, it feels exactly worth 3 mana every time I use it. You were supposed to go along with the bit and just go, I hate it. Oh, I'm sorry. I mean, I don't love it. I find it useful at 3 mana. How about a deck with 4 cards that cost a blue and say counter target spell on them? Is that a thing you like to do? Keeping up mana is not what I like doing. I like using my mana on my turn, because sometimes my opponent can just do nothing. And then what am I doing? What am I countering, Dave? Well, we got a couple of good cards to help with that, actually. Please go on. That would be Faithful, Mending, and Consider, which both we kind of implied were going to be in this deck. So those are all the cards that kind of moved into this deck to force it over into Esper. Yes, exactly. So what all do you lose from this deck by doing that? You lose the Stoneforge Mystic package, right?
but what else?
Yeah, which is not even like typical. It's not even typically in most of the Reanimator decks. But I think what Gabe did here is they brought in, like Dave was saying, 4 Consider and 4 Faithful Mending and 3 Teferi Time Raveler. So that's kind of the biggest difference. And what kind of gets moved out of this is like the Grief Ephemerate thing, which people still like in some of these decks. There's no option for the Stoneforge thing because there's no room. And there's not a lot of room for any bonus Inquisition if you're playing Consider, more or less.
Yeah, that's right. Oh, there's still 4 Thoughtseize, but there's no additional ones. I see.
Yeah, so you're running kind of this blend of a hand disruptive deck with Thoughtseize, a little bit of board interaction with your 4 Prismatics, and then just kind of the filtering engine of Consider and Faithful Mending to try to get stuff into your yard and just dig a little bit. And so you look at this and you're like, okay, all the stuff looks cool. Like Teferi Time Raveler does get around that issue where it's like, I want to do stuff on my opponent's turn, and the plus allows you to do that, where you can keep up Faithful Mending. You could represent all sorts of stuff. You could represent Faithful Mending, Counterspell, Prismatic Ending. You can represent things like Unmarked Grave to then set up like a Persist on the next turn. So the opponent does have a little bit of a trouble potentially knowing what you're doing once you have a Teferi Time Raveler out and you have the ability to keep plussing it instead of minusing it. So the real idea here, I think, is we have Faithful Mending. Does the shell then warrant including it? And does the power of the card warrant including it in a shell that makes you go into blue, white, black, also known as Esper? And ostensibly, this should be good in a Reanimator package, right? Like it's instant, like we've been getting at a lot, which lets you play it at unexpected times. Like you never were able to like just sort of represent a counterspell and then cast Faithless Looting on your opponent's end step, and then untap and cast a Reanimator spell like Persist or Unburial Rites or something like that. That was never really an option for you. But the mana efficiency of Faithless Looting didn't really require that. Like you just would do it on turn 1 and then say, hey, I've got some stuff in my graveyard that I'm going to work with on turn 2. So you better hope you have like a Relic of Progenitus or something like that that's going to stop me from going off on turn 2 with my Cathartic Reunion or whatever kind of shenanigan, or like, opt, whatever people could do on turn 2. Hollow One could do bonker stuff on turn 2. So anyway, it's instant speed. That's good. That's a new angle of attack and allows the deck to be doing other stuff if it doesn't have, if it needs to counter a spell or something like that. And then it draws you through your deck and discards reanimation targets. That's something that reanimation decks have always wanted to do. I want to dig, I want to discard. Faithless Looting was one of the best ways to go about doing that in the past, and this card should be a good way to do that. And then it also gains some life, which buys you some time against aggressive starts, against wide boards, and that life gain, I will give you a little bit of a spoiler, is certainly handy.
I think it's worth mentioning here too that there's even more versions of this deck out there. Like this is, as you said, this is Spider Space's version, but Everett has also been playing this deck a lot lately, and I think that he's been playing a lot of the deck with Gifts Ungiven as well. And this is a classic kind of Reanimator shell that's been on the bubble in Modern for a long time, which is,
and 4 Chalice.
Yeah, he uses Chalice too. Yeah.
Yeah, he has no 1 mana spells, so he's doing that. He's doing that Chalice control thing.
So
but what's Gifts all about?
So he's cut Consider from his deck. It's worth mentioning in favor of just having Faithful Mending. But yeah, so Chalice. But so Gifts is a deck that people used to try to play sometimes, and a key part of that is Unburial Rites, because what it allows you to do is guarantee that you're going to get a reanimation spell after you cast Gifts Ungiven, because it doesn't matter, as long as you have the land, it doesn't matter if they put Unburial Rites in your hand or your graveyard. So what happens is you basically get a stack that's like Persist, an Unburial Rites, a reanimation target, and maybe a discard outlet, and you kind of tell your opponent, like, go ahead, pick 2 of this stack to put into your graveyard, and no matter what, you get what you want.
Oh, or you could just pick 2 cards that they're forced to put into the graveyard.
Oh, right.
That's the other line.
Yeah. You don't have to pick. That's right. You don't have to. It's up to 4 cards basically.
Right.
I'm going to admit something to y'all. Okay. So Unburial Rites has been a card that I've seen in most, but not all, reanimation decks. I've always find it a little bit clunky, right? It's like, well, it costs 5 on the front side. What am I discarding this to enable the flashback. And I think maybe that argument was somewhat there in the past. But one, this deck, of course, enables looting a little bit better, or mending in this case, where it's going to discard stuff to your graveyard with Consider or Faithful Mending. But two, you can target Unburial Rites with Unmarked Grave. Okay? Unmarked Grave does not say search your library for a non-legendary creature. It's simply a non-legendary card. So when you need to draw into a reanimation spell, you can simply, and then you have like extra Unmarked Grave, which happens all the time. So you Unmarked Grave, get your Unburial Rites in the graveyard, and then you have that flashback spell set up for the future. And now that when I've realized that, that's come in handy in this deck, especially because of the additional discard outlets. And that's been something where now I see the point of running this spell, and now I like it right now. So we'll see if that lasts.
Yeah, I just think it's probably a good piece to have around in this deck, since there's so many different ways to have it advantageously.
Yeah, for me, like I was always big on Priest of Fell Rites, which is also a thing that you see is missing from this deck entirely. I think Priest is actually a little bit underappreciated. I think that some people cut it from their Reanimator decks thinking it's like, hey, it opens me up for cheap removal, like I can get Fatal Pushed, or I can get Lightning Bolted. And for me, especially in the Stoneforge version, that's fine. Because like if my Priest is eating a removal spell, that's one thing that my Stoneforge is surviving. And then it just sort of puts additional pressure on the opponent saying like, oh, can I let them untap with this? And if you get to 5 mana, you unearth it. So it's just another way to use your mana as the game goes long. And this deck also is not running that because of just the increased spell suite of like the Faithful Mending, of Counterspell, of up to a full 4 Prismatic Ending, and the full 4 Consider.
Shane, is this Splinter Twin?
No. I don't think it's Splinter Twin. I think it can become a Murktide type deck, where it's kind of like a little bit protect the king/queen / non-binary royal ruler.
Protect the royalty.
So I think that it doesn't feel exactly like that to me. Not Splinter Twin, mainly because so much of your stuff is not instant speed. It only becomes instant speed with Teferi on the board.
The only reason I ask is just because like you play this control strategy with counter spells, removal, and even hand disruption, and then you can potentially just have like a combo turn where it's out of nowhere you've got a 7/7 flyer protection from whatever is relevant.
It never. Okay, I will also say that I'm not like some steeped Splinter Twin player. I've never really played Splinter Twin. I've played creature combo style decks, but not control combo creature decks, I guess.
This is news to me.
It never feels that way to me. But I guess I can also see that, where it's like, as long as I'm not dying, eventually I'm going to reanimate something and stick it, right? And then maybe I'll have some counter magic backup. But like the thing about this deck, though, is like it's not playing like sweepers. It's not playing Dam. It's not playing Supreme Verdict. It's not doing something that can completely reset the game. And so I don't think you can sit back on your laurels like you can maybe with a control combo deck, and also doesn't win quite as quickly or as conclusively as like a twin deck does. Like you still can have your Archon of Cruelty hit with an Unholy Heat. You can still have it hit with a Terminate and lose. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was going to say, I don't think this is just because it doesn't win on the spot. Like you have to grind it out still. You need those couple turns.
Yeah, you still have to win. Like, and that's what is kind of fun about the deck. And I think that's where kind of like your counter spells and your prismatic endings and things like that come into play, is where it's like, I can protect this Archon of Cruelty or the Sarah's Emissary, like when my opponent tried to Unholy Heat it, and it had they had 4 card types in their graveyard, and it's like, Stan, is this a good time to cast Counterspell when they're targeting my only creature with a removal spell?
I would certainly try. I'm just like, to say that Sarah's Emissary doesn't win on the spot, again, I haven't played this deck, so I have to take your word for it. It's just
certain decks it does, most decks it doesn't.
Okay.
Because the real problem is some decks, they can bounce it with a Planeswalker.
Yeah.
They can hit it with an instant or a sorcery, or if they're a creature deck that also has spell-based removal. Like imagine, like what would you name against a Murktide deck? Do you know what I mean? Like what would you name against a Luris spell-based deck? It's just like there's creatures and spells of many types, and so it's just like it's hard to figure out what to name just with Sarah. There's some decks though, like I played against Affinity. And then it's just like name artifact. There's some like there's Eldrazi Tron, name Eldrazi, name creature, you basically win. Same with elementals. Like you can pretty much name creature and they have very few outs at that point. So there's some decks that it is big game and some decks it's not. I always love having access to one because when you need it, you get that. When you need Archon, you get Archon. Continuing on kind of like this issue, the issues with Faithful Mending, like we talked about the benefits maybe 8 minutes ago. The issue perhaps a benefit is that Faithful Mending is white and a blue. And the reanimation package of Unmarked Grave and Persist and usual suspects like Thoughtseize is based around black. So it's typical to have included white in these decks to get you access to Prismatic Ending, and I think primarily great sideboard cards. And I guess Stoneforge, if you're me, main deck, and Ephemerate is typical in these decks as well. But it's not like white is some amazing foundation for the deck that like it's built around. Like you're not running white to get access to all the amazing creatures that shores up this deck. It's just always kind of made sense to be an Orzhov-based deck. But blue gets you counter magic. Mm-hmm. Or it got you counter magic, but now it gets you Faithful Mending. And the appeal to running like this entire group of cards together has made people experiment with Esper. And my play experience with it was weird in that it didn't feel drastically different than my play with Orzhov, meaning in that it won the same way. And this, it's kind of like I can counterspell what they're doing. When I was playing a deck with more Inquisitions, it was like I'm Inquisitioning what they're doing before they do it and make sure the coast is clear and then try to stick my Archon so that I can avoid their Terminate or I can avoid the Unholy Heat or something like that, right? The way this plays out, though, and I was hinting at this earlier, I think, with the instant speed stuff, is that Faithful Mending being instant speed and Teferi Time Raveler allowing you to cast your spells at instant speed is very weird. Like it gives you lines that you don't have in the Orzhov variant because you can represent things, like I said, like the counterspell. Representing a counterspell, people play very different. You know what I mean? Or representing the instant speed ability, like you said, Stan, is like, can I tap out against my opponent right now? Because they might just do an instant speed Unmarked Grave, and then I have to worry about them reanimating something. And all of that, I think, worked really well. The thing that I didn't have enough time to actually draw and play enough with was Consider. And just my gut feeling and seat of the pants reaction is that I'm not sure this deck needs Consider. And I think one of the reasons I like the Orzhov version I've been playing is that it has a few alternate ways to discard something for value, and that's with a Bone Shards, with a Collective Brutality, and those do something when you discard a card. And what Consider is doing is just kind of like giving you a little bit of velocity and potentially allowing you to discard something you want into your graveyard. And I'm not sure if that's there yet for me. But it's something that I do need to keep considering because it's just something that I don't have enough reps with. But I lean towards the ability to interact with what my opponent's doing because my strategy is a little bit fragile. Like having only Archon and only Sarah means my graveyard needs to stick around. I need to stop Graveyard Hate. I need to stop removal spells on my reanimation targets. And Consider doesn't actually do that for me. So I want a few more reps with it in that way. And then one of the things that was also kind of a little bit rough was the mana. And I played this deck exactly as Spider Space did. I built it exactly like they did. It has a singleton Mystic Gate. It has 2 River of Tears, which is a land I've never played. It is a very interesting land in that you add blue to your mana pool, but if you played a land this turn, you add black to your mana pool instead. So the turn you play it, it can only be tapped for black. But then on like your opponent's turn, it taps for blue. And the conceit there, or the concept there at least, is that it's better for counterspell. Because you're going to counterspell on your opponent's turn most typically, and then it's always a blue mana. And then you can kind of make it what you want on your turn, like if you tap it to float something, before you play another land or something like that, it can be blue or it can be black. Oh, and overall kind of like a typical fetch shock basic situation, but it's something that I have to get used to and have to get used to playing. But Faithful Mending, just to go back to that as kind of the card of focus here, I think is quite good at what it's doing. It gets really nice to discard cards that doesn't require having I don't have to 2-for-1 myself necessarily because I'm drawing cards and then discarding them. I'm not discarding the card to Bone Shards with the hope of reanimating it. I don't have to discard it to Collective Brutality with the hope of reanimating it. I'm sort of just getting raw value by digging through my deck and then tossing these reanimation targets out of my hand. And I like that quite a bit. Like I said, I like the Unburial Rites at 4 mana getting into my graveyard. I definitely want to keep playing this. I'm curious about shaving the spell suite down a little bit and then and adding back in Stoneforge, like something that I never thought I'd be like Stoneforge's Bay, but apparently she is mine in reanimation, which is just like, hey, I need more threats. I don't want to rely on just these reanimation targets. Like I want to present an alternate threat line. But overall, I think that it is a good spell. It's a good spell in this deck. The life gain was clutch. I gained 6 life last time in a match against Panza when they had lethal otherwise, and I was able to just flash it back from the graveyard, cast another one from my hand, put myself well out of bolt range, and then just swing in for the win on the Archon. There's just a lot of good things to do with this card and this deck, I think, overall. So I'm a believer. I'm a sleever, rather. I think it's good. I like the strategy. I am not sure I like it more than what I've been doing, but I think that this is just an early version and we're going to keep getting better.
I'm happy for you. It did just occur to me while you were talking about Consider that we all played Consider.
Yeah, that's kind of the idea.
That's what I was talking about.
For your consideration, title.
That is what I was thinking about calling the app.
We're just gonna rename the podcast to NPR Presents for your consideration. Are we an NPR show? Or are we like an APM?
I thought we were Panoply.
All the way.
Oh, PRI? Yeah, okay.
PRI.
Spider Space, thanks for giving me this template to work with. I'm definitely going to pick your brain on Discord, and maybe we can have another chat about this in the near future.
Dave,
what do you got for us? Are we going back to that well?
Are you so surprised that we didn't have this first? Every time it's possible that we would ever do this, could ever play this card? Episode 1.
Dave, does this have Thought Scour?
This deck does have Thought Scour.
Okay, does it have Arclight Phoenix?
This deck does have Arclight Phoenix.
It's like going back to episode 1, baby.
Is.
Does it feel bad if you Thought Scour yourself and the wrong cards go into your graveyard?
Oh, it feels so bad.
I hate when that happens.
It doesn't at all. You knew we were going to do it. It's time to talk about... this deck, we're going to talk about Jeskai Phoenix. It's Phoenix, it's Jeskai. It's 2 of my favorite things, in theory, together in one deck. It's got your lightning bolts, it's got your cantrips, it's got all the kind of things that I love and Stan loved at one point in time as well.
Yeah.
So here we are. Jeskai Phoenix, designed by Everett and piloted to a top 6 in the Modern Challenge on Saturday. He really likes this deck. I watched him on the stream talking about it. He feels very, very good about the way that this is built right now. So I'm going to talk about the deck list really quickly to say what's in here. So only 2 creatures in this deck. 4 Arclight Phoenix, 4 Demi-Lich, and I'm going to read Demi-Lich in case you forgot about what it does. It's mythic from the Dungeons & Dragons set. Its mana cost is blue, 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 blue. It's a 4/3, and it says this spell costs 1 blue less to cast for each instant or sorcery you cast this turn. Whenever Demi-Lich attacks, exile up to 1 target or instant or sorcery card from your graveyard, copy it. You may cast the copy. You have to pay for the copy, just to note that when you attack. You may cast Demi-Lich from your graveyard by exiling 4 instants and or sorcery cards from your graveyard in addition to paying its other costs.
So when you do that, is the other cost discounted by any instants and sorceries you played that turn?
Correct.
Cool.
And so it really... So here's
it's Hollow One. It sounds like Hollow One.
It's honestly more like Arclight Phoenix than anything else. It's just Arclight Phoenix where it's 4 spells to do it instead of 3, basically. Mm-hmm. And you can cast it from your hand as well. So it's not completely reliant on the graveyard. Now, to get all the value, you want the graveyard, of course, to be able to do it, and to be able to cast it more than once, you want all the graveyard and da-da-da-da. But it is something that you have these hands sometimes where you honestly can go turn 3, I'm going to get 3 Arclight Phoenixes and 3 Demi-Liches into play. If you have these like weird draws like that. It totally happened to me a couple of times.
Do you win those games?
I won one of them. I didn't win the other one. I tell you what, to talk about the Pen Sword again, Shark Typhoon is a heck of a card, especially if you really know what you're doing with it and just want to have a whole bunch of blockers, because he hard cast it So I got all those into play not on turn 3. It was a later turn where I got 6 different creatures into play, but he had blockers and spells and everything to be able to keep me from killing him. Anyway, as an aside, so first thing, threat package in here, really slim. It's just 8 cards plus all the spells. That's the whole deck, essentially. Evert, I listened to him on chat a bunch of times, is really confident in this being the right creature package. He doesn't think that we need Dragon's Rage Channeler in the deck. He doesn't think you want Thing in the Ice in this deck. He doesn't think you want anything else kind of like gumming up the works. You just want the spell-based payoffs for this deck and kind of go from there. I kind of believe it after this. Definitely, especially given the way the spells work out, but it was still a surprise to me that one of the best cards from Modern Horizons that everybody has acknowledged how much they love, that is a graveyard payoff that can mill Phoenixes or Demi-Liches into your graveyard, is not worth including this deck. I think it just kind of gets in the way. The spell suite. Let's talk about the stuff that you are familiar with being in the spell suite here. So, of course, as we know, the goal with these decks is to cast and draw into as many spells as you can in a given turn, so that you can play your cards for free and attack with hasty birds and do other things. So what we're running here is Lightning Bolt and Manamorphose, Thought Scour, Serum Visions, and Gutshot are the old cards that we're kind of used to. It's all play sets except for Gutshot is only a 3 of instead of a 4 of. And then, and those cards do what you expect. Manamorphose is super important in a deck like this. It's one of the things that makes Modern Phoenix so much faster and so much more reliable than maybe Historic Phoenix, although Historic Phoenix is very good at different points in time and still is a playable deck from my understanding. I'll be curious to see where it ends up with Faithful Mending and consider as well. Gutshot's a free spell for you. Lightning Bolt is just, your good interaction, a little bit of extra burn. And then, of course, Thought Scour, feed the graveyard, draw a card, get an extra spell. Serum Visions, set up your future draws. Like that's kind of what the whole game is. So that's a large portion of the spells. Then we have the cards that I would say are basically new. And that includes Consider, Prismatic Ending, full playset of Prismatic Ending in this deck, 4 Faithful Mending, of course, and 4 Faithless Salvaging, which is interesting. It's a card that people have been playing around with a lot since Modern Horizons 2 came out. But I think that together with Faithful Mending, it finally has enough redundant copies of your kind of looting effects that the deck has kind of moved on to the next level from where it was before.
Yeah, I feel like Evert is one of the few like Faithless Salvaging stalwarts out there. Like he seems like he continually thinks that it's worth it. It's the rebound is really valuable for getting those multi-spell turns, especially. So the mana cost is definitely tougher, but it does do work.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? So you talked a lot, Shane, a lot about Faithful Mending being an instant, and Faithless Salvaging has the same plus to it, where you get to set it up where you cast it at the end of turn 2 to kind of get your stuff rolling. And then when you come back on turn 3, you're kind of trying to set yourself up to do Faithless Salvaging into 3 single mana spells of some kind, because you'll notice an incredible amount of the cards in this deck are a single mana. I mean, Consider, Gutshot, Lightning Bolt, Prismatic Ending, Serum Visions, and Thought Scour are all a single mana. You get your Manamorphose into turn 3 there, where you get an extra spell trigger on top of that as well. And so the only card that really makes a giant turn 3 hard sometimes is Faithful Mending, and you can still kind of take care of that by having Manamorphose as one of your cards in your hand that you sequence as well. So not only does Faithless Salvaging help you get to turn 3 with 3 spells more often, it helps you get to turn 3 with 4 spells more often, which is where you want to be in order to cast Demi-Lich. And so, I think that this engine just really works. It feels really slick. It feels like pretty consistent. It's nice that you have Prismatic Ending as a card that comes along and really levels up the interaction that this deck can have. It lets you run something that is main deck interaction for graveyard hate, basically, that doesn't penalize you all that much, because it also helps you get rid of creatures. It also can be cast as a toss-off 1 mana spell if you need it too, which I think is something that happens quite frequently. We're looking for spell triggers.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely have talked about Prismatic Ending and appreciated Prismatic Ending, but I just can't get over how good it is and just how efficient and effective it is against all sorts of things that I think formerly would be pretty good. Like I exiled a Clothis. You know what I mean? Like it just with a main deck spell that I could also take care of Graveyard Hate. It also just tags a Clothis because it exiles. And now that I'm in a 3-color deck, it gives me a more powerful Prismatic Ending. It scales so well, and it just handles so many different kinds of permanents that Prismatic Ending is one of the top 3 game changers out of Horizons 2, maybe? I don't know.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think it's by far one of the biggest for sure. I mean, it's so important. And like you said, it lets decks have outs to hate with no real downside because it gets rid of so many different types of permanents. I think it's good. Like, I don't know what else to say. I think it's legit. I will say I did terrible with this deck personally, but I think that it was because I was extremely tired while I was playing it, but we can come back to that in a minute.
So you say it's good, Dave.
Mm-hmm.
I think the real question is, do you think these 2 cards are enough to bring Phoenix back?
Yes, on turn 3 quite often.
Yeah, cut to the chase. Is Phoenix back? If so, why?
Well, okay, so I do think Phoenix is probably back. Yeah, I mean, I think that it's and coupled with Everett's performance, I mean, I think that it might even be less vulnerable to Graveyard Hate than it was before because Prismatic Ending helps it be able to fight off all the permanent based Graveyard Hate that you would run across. Now it's still pretty resilient, or still pretty vulnerable to Surgical Extraction, which I think is going to make a big uptick too. But that's kind of a different thing altogether.
So what's interesting to me here is your argument almost sounds like Prismatic Ending is perhaps the best reason to actually go into Jeskai, since Faithful Mending, like that could be replaced with Izzet Charm, and we know that Izzet Charm doesn't really do the job at replacing Faithless Looting, but now we have these 2 things.
Yes, but okay, so let's talk about that. I think that's a great question, Stan, because we have been here for a long time and we've been able to play Izzet Charm instead of Faithful Mending. And even I went back and forth on this a little bit during previous season where I was like, is this going to be good enough? Is it not going to be good enough? Is it just Izzet Charm? Like someone said to me, it's just Izzet Charm. And I was like, oh my God, it's just Izzet Charm. It's not going to be anything. Here's the thing.
It gains you 2 life.
That is actually huge in this deck.
No.
Because
that's not the thing, though. Come on.
No, it's not the thing. It's not the thing. The thing is that it has flashback. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's giant. Like, I can't overstate enough. And I think everybody understands, but, the fact that you can discard this to a card, or you can cast Faithful Mending at the end of turn 2 and then cast it again on the end of turn 3 if you need to for some reason, because your engine is sputtering basically, is giant. And that it's instant speed is a huge difference. I mean, so that's really what makes it not just Izzet Charm is that you can mill it with a Thought Scour or cast it out of your hand and get two casts out of it. It's giant. It's not even close to the same card as a result of that, honestly.
Yeah, it's weird how efficient flashback costs can be good.
Mm-hmm. But the two life now is the thing that lets this deck be in Jeskai, because you can really punish yourself with the mana base of this deck. But because you can gain 4 life or 6 life in a game quite often, you can just go right back up and go back and get it. Get whatever mana you want. Keep going. The mana base in here, I do think, is hard. And if people start to have a lot of aspirations of doing something like playing Blood Moon, again, that's going to be really difficult for a deck like this to fight against because it's really vulnerable to it. You have no interaction in that way as it's currently configured. You do have Wear Tear in the sideboard, but there's no basic planes. So you can't really go and do it. You have to have mana up to fight against Blood Moon in that situation. But I think that the Faithful Mending package, or the Faithful Mending card itself, that's what makes it hugely different from Izzet Charm right there. And then let's talk about Consider. So Shane, you were kind of I don't really like Consider, don't really want to do that, yada yada. Didn't think it was that great.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, it's a different
deck. I think it's way, way, way better in this deck, of course, because I really care about drawing cards in this deck. And I really care about putting random cards in the graveyard. You're looking for pretty specific cards in Esper Reanimator. I think in this one, I really just want a bunch of bulk in the graveyard so that I can do a bunch of stuff. Yeah.
Yep. This makes sense. Yeah, I mean, this is it's what Izzet Phoenix always wants, right? Which is an efficient card to do stuff that also randomly can fill your yard if you wanted to.
Yes. I will say, I think that the sequencing of this deck is actually a lot harder now than it was before, just because...
And it wasn't easy, I don't think, before.
No, it definitely wasn't easy, but now I think, trying to figure out if you're going to go for Demi-Lich and what you're going to have your Demi-Lich cast and what you're going to exile with your Demi-Lich is kind of a whole thing. Trying to figure out what you're going to... if you're going to try to go for Demi-Liches or if you're going to try to go for Arclight Phoenixes, if you're going to try to keep stuff around, like it's a lot harder. And I think that's part of the reason that I had some difficulty playing when I was playing the deck. I also think that, Gutshot is one of those cards that's like a necessary evil right now, which I wouldn't be surprised if this just becomes like, we're just going to run. Remember when Phoenix started and it was like, we're going to run Gutshot. And it was like great because Humans was around, and so you could kill Noble Hierarch, and that's why Gutshot was really good. And then as the metagame evolved away from that, we ended up with Surgical Extraction main instead of Gutshot. It kind of feels like that same thing will just happen again here to me, where if we have a bunch of decks that are running Faithful Mending decks or Graveyard Synergy decks, that maybe it'll be worth it to have Surgical Ending in your main instead, and it'll just be a more active spell than Gutshot is.
Yeah. What do you think about Demi-Lich overall?
I think it's fantastic.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have another threat that is exactly the same thing that you're trying to do with Phoenix with this card, and the fact that you can control when it comes back out of the graveyard a little more easily than you can with Phoenix helps. So occasionally you can cast it one for like blue out of your graveyard. You reduce the cost, and then you exile for instants or sorceries, and then you cast it for blue, and then you can kind of try to get your engine going again if somebody's killed your team.
So between like Omega Star Phoenix and Diamond Eye Demi-Lich, what's your favorite card to look at? What are you happier on the battlefield, Dave?
It's definitely, I still think Phoenix is definitely the primary game plan of the deck.
Okay. Which one do you like more? How it looks?
Oh, I like Arclight Phoenix better. I like my birds.
Okay, good.
For sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
So regarding Demi-Lich, I did try playing it in the historic version, and that card really is not as good when you don't have Manamorphose. I think Manamorphose really enables some really broken Demi-Lich stuff, whereas without Manamorphose or some kind of like mana generating instant or sorcery, it's just a little harder to do truly busted stuff with it.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it so I don't think that you're ever trying to like be busted with Demi-Lich, although you do get these mid-game turns, like I said, like when you're on like turn 5 or turn 6, where you're like, okay, I've managed to put 18 cards in my graveyard, and you've killed my Demi-Lich and you killed my Phoenixes, and now I'm gonna cast 4 spells and pull them all back out of the graveyard again right now and cash in my whole graveyard to do it. Like, Manamorphose is a key part of sequences like that, just because you need the pass through and you need the mana. But I think that for the most part, Demi-Lich is sort of there to be a little bit of a safety to the fast opens that Arclight Phoenix can have, where occasionally Demi-Lich lets you like put a threat out on the board where you're like, I'm going to swing in and I'm just going to lightning bolt one of your creatures again and hit you. Or I'm going to swing in and I'm going to cast Prismatic Ending again, and I'm going to get rid of something that you have. Or maybe if I'm really desperate, I'm going to do Faithful Mending. Like, I think that it lets you really transition into a longer game plan than maybe Phoenix by itself did, or maybe even Phoenix when Phoenix had Thing in the Ice as well really, really got to do,
Yeah.
Is Faithless Salvaging wasn't in Jumpstart, was it?
It was.
It was. So that's on Historic too.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that. I feel like that card really helps Demi-Lich be better as well. Like I said, just because it helps you get into like I'm going to play 3/1 mana spells on turn 3 and also have that extra trigger,
Right.
And also set myself up by looting twice. So I don't know. I mean, I think this deck is a believe plus. I think that's just because I did so terribly with it when I was playing. I think this deck will continue to evolve, but I'm super happy to have it back in the stable. I definitely I'm going to go out and buy 4 Demi-Liches now before they get too much more expensive. They've already spiked like $3 or $4 a piece in the last week, but
They've been expensive.
thanks to Spike.
Dave, you're going to get 4 Goldspan Dragons at like 50 bones each for no reason whatsoever.
Goldspan Dragon is $50.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it. Standard, maybe other things, who knows?
I have one.
Sell
I gotta
it.
get rid of it.
That's my financial tip.
Thanks. Get rid of this Goldspan Dragon. All right, so Stan, does any of this make you want to play this deck? Like, this was your baby for so long, and now are you just so far away? It really feels like the same deck. I got to tell you, it's so close to feeling like the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would. I would. Sure. I try. Like I said, I tried to play it in Historic. I think.
I mean, I played Blue-Red a ton in Historic before Brainstorm was banned. Like, I played that for a solid month. You know, that was the only deck that I played. Back when people were kind of like, I don't know if it's good or not, but...
Yeah. Well, we knew it was good. Well, now, even... First of all, Brainstorm is suspended.
Oh, right.
It could be back any day now. And we don't need Brainstorm because we have Consider now. It's better. It's like between Brainstorm and Thought Scour.
Mm-hmm. I do think Consider is really powerful. I think it's interesting that a lot of the decks that would want to run Consider for value right now, like the blue-white control decks, can't because they really want to run Chalice instead. Right. And so the decks that are getting the most mileage out of Consider are these ones that are really maximizing the graveyard synergy. But I think that once we pass through this Chalice phase, which I imagine there'll be a turn of the meta crank where control decks don't want to play Chalice anymore. I think it'll be back. But
I think... Consider an opt. Like, Consider is good if you have something to do with the graveyard. Otherwise, you could just play opt.
I think Consider is always better than opt. But maybe this is a good cue to go on to your deck because you were going to talk about a deck that played a lot of Consider too, right?
That's true, yeah. So...
I'm so amped for this, Dan.
Playing Modern is hard for me right now. I'm always holding a child, but I can play Historic with one hand. And it's really fast to knock out matches.
Dad confessions.
Yeah, that's true too.
We were chatting about this a little bit when my kids were born. At least my first kid was when my older son was born. I was trying to sneak in Magic, and it was before they even had leagues. It was before leagues started, so it was just like sign up for a sit and go. I don't even remember what those were called. Were those just called tournaments, or there's the queues? Like I don't even remember what it was called anymore.
Yeah.
But I would try to do like an Oath of the Gatewatch draft while my son was sleeping when he was like 3 months old, and he would always wake up in the middle of the third match, and I would be like, but I envy you in that sense.
Yeah. I mean, my kid is 6 weeks old, and I still get a few hours to myself at night, but I've been mostly just playing Assassin's Creed and then playing Magic, with my phone. And that's how I prepared for this week's episode. Izzet Delver, reprinted in Midnight Hunt.
Somehow, interestingly.
Yeah, a very hype reprint for...
Okay, no, you mean Delver of Secrets, not Izzet Delver.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm sure no one knew what you were talking about.
That's right. Izzet Delver of Secrets. Basically the same thing. I was very excited about this reprint. One of my favorite cards that I never really got to explore in its heyday. In either Modern and, I don't play Legacy. And, it's a very beloved card. I think a lot of people speculated that this might be one of the reprints. I think I may have mentioned that it was a possibility when we were imagining what the hint could be. And typically, Delver of Secrets enables the type of decks and strategies that I like to play, which are maybe Phoenix adjacent even, play a cheap threat or some kind of threat and a ton of spells around it. So the first thing I did as soon as the set came out was I crafted 4 of these for Consider and for Play with Fire and just started like moving pieces around to see what I could do. But in terms of like data, on Untapped, as of this morning, and I think the data has moved around a little bit, but this morning in Best of One, Izzet Delver had like a 60% win rate from Bronze to Myth. So it wasn't just me. Like there were hundreds of matches already within days of like the same deck list putting up results. That's not including like all the different iterations people are putting on that doesn't get picked up from the Untapped data pool. And I think that's also partially impressive for Best of One because prior to Midnight Hunt, we talked about this. The format was just plagued with these very linear combo decks that would just kind of win on the spot on turn 4 and would make for very unfun play experiences. And maybe the reason Delver has kind of, in addition to being super popular, was able to circumvent that hyperlinear strategy at first is because these Delver decks run a lot of counter spells to protect their cheap turn 1 threats. And that's, I think, a really good way to actually deal with these combo decks that will often tap out to try to cast a game-winning spell.
So can we talk about what all is in this deck real quick?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. So it's Delver of Secrets. and a bunch of counter spells and like some cheap removal spells and expressive iteration.
Are those all the threats you're playing, or what other are you playing? Any other creatures, or what's in the deck that you've liked the most? Because I'm looking at Untapped right now, and they're little all over the place.
Yeah, so I think the second best creature is Sprite Dragon, and then in third place it's close. It's either Dragon's Rage Channeler or Stormwing Entity.
Whoa.
I kind of can't make up my mind on which of those two I like more because they kind of lend themselves to different decks.
So interesting. That's that's not a card I was expecting you to say would be in here, Stormwing Entity.
But Stormwing Entity, it's not improved by Delver per se. It's improved by Consider and Play with Fire.
Mm-hmm.
Like we just have so many playable 1 mana instants that...
Play with Fireable?
Exactly. That you can now like get a turn 3 Stormwing Entity and some value on top of it, like anytime it's in your opening hand. So figuring out the exact right shell for Delver has kind of helped me go back and forth between those two cards. I do think that you want to go with Dragon's Rage over Stormwing because turn 1 Delver, you want to have some kind of counter spells up on turn 2. So when I talked about like you put Delver and a bunch of counter magic in there, you have Memory Lapse, of course, but you also have, you can play Lofty Denial, right? Mana Beak, which if you do manage to flip Delver on turn 2, it's like...
Huge.
Basically counterspell.
Yeah.
Mana Beak is at that point. And even if you don't, the Force Spike effect is often good enough too.
Yeah, that's awesome. This deck is beautiful. I love looking at all these cards. Yeah. I want to play all these cards.
Yeah. So it's been what, like 5-6 days since the set came out? After toying with Delver in that time, I think the realization I came to is that Delver might be just the best blue 1-drop in the format.
Okay.
Like it's competing with Shoreline Scout, Ascendant Spirit, and Spectral Sailor. And I think that's the new merfolk that fetches the tropical island.
Excuse me, don't forget the one that...
Mausoleum Wanderer or whatever?
That's not a historic.
No.
Don't forget
the other bad one.
The pirate.
Spectral Sailor.
Not Spectral Sailor. The one that... The one that's a siren that has a counterspell attached to it.
Right.
You know.
So the reason why I think this is actually the best blue 1-drop in the format now is because perhaps with the exception of Ascendant Spirit, it's like can single-handedly capable of running away with the game.
Yeah, I mean it's a laughable thing to look at Ascendant Spirit versus... I mean, I was playing Mono Blue Spirits for a while, right? Like I really like that deck. I really like Mana Beak and all that kind of Lofty Denial, all that kind of stuff. I tried it with Memory Lapse, but the meta had really changed away from that deck by the time Memory Lapse was there. But Ascendant Spirit is like so funny to look at in comparison to Delver, where it's like you have to put 4 more mana.
Right.
No, you have to put 6 more mana, I think, into Ascendant Spirit to get it to be a 4/4 flyer.
Yes.
And Delver's like, get an instant on top and I'll be a 3/2 if you want. Sure.
So there's that. And also, Brainstorm currently suspended, but we could get it back any day now. Fingers crossed.
Keep dreaming. One
of the ways that you make up for the fact that it's really hard to control the top of your library is by playing fewer lands. And one of the coolest versions of Delver that I've seen in Historic so far only
runs 10 lands.
It runs 12.
12. I'm looking at one right now that only runs 12 lands. Yeah.
It runs 12 lands and then a bunch of MDFCs, including Jawari Disruption. So what happens is, you flip like Seagate Restoration off the top, and then you play that as your land drop.
You shock yourself. Yeah.
You bolt yourself. So on the one hand, if I did my odds right in like this 12 land version of the deck, you're about 75% to flip Delver on turn 2.
I mean, that seems like a really smart thing to do here, honestly. The one that I'm looking at here only runs 1 Jawari Disruption. It runs, looks like 2 Shatter Skull Smashings and 2 Seagate Restorations, which takes it from 12 regular lands to 17 lands, right. One of which comes into play tapped. So that doesn't seem like too much, like you get punished for that too often.
No, not in a deck full of cantrips, especially.
Yeah. You could theoretically have Jawari Disruption as your turn 2 to land play with an untapped blue mana source and still have Spell Pierce up, I guess, if you were going to go that way. So
that's the deck. Yeah, I mean, that's actually the one I probably had the most success with, because that's one that also runs Dragon's Rage Channeler and Sprite Dragon.
And Brazen Borrower is a 2 of as well.
Oh, I don't think I had Brazen in my...
Okay.
which is probably, I don't know. I think Brazen Borrow is kind of replaceable, but
This one also has Curious Obsession as a 4 of. Were you playing Curious Obsession?
I was playing Curious Obsession.
Yes. I love that card so much.
I think the reason you want to play it isn't just to get up on cards, but it's a good card type to get in the bin sometimes with Dragon Rage Channeler, so that you can get 3/3 flyers up more frequently too.
It makes a ton of sense. Yeah, I love it.
So, on Delver as a card, my conclusion for it specifically is that I think it's fine. And the decks that it enables are worst case scenario, just like fun, playable piles. I don't think it necessarily has what it takes to be the new top tier one. Maybe with a little bit of time and some more reprints and a brainstorm unban. Or like on a long enough timeline, maybe we'll actually get Bolt and Counterspell and legal and historic finally, because they are on Arena. But but until I really am the luckiest boy in the world and get all my favorite cards, I don't think Delver is going to be the best deck, but I think it's fine, especially because DRC and Sprite Dragon are great threats as well, and you do have solid, cheap, playable interaction that you can protect any turn 1 or turn 2 threat reasonably well.
Awesome. How do you think it fits in with the decks that you saw right now? Are you seeing less of the countery decks or not countery, the combo-y decks, or where's the meta at a glance?
Oh man, the meta is insane. The meta is at that point right now in week 1 where it's just everyone is taking new cards and seeing if they work in their old favorite decks. So I was running up against Control, Combo, Gruul Aggro, Dimir Rogues, people just really seeing how good Consider is, I think is a big one. But also just seeing how good random creatures are as well. Zombies and vampires too. So the meta is actually hard. It's hard to metagame against, and that's why a reasonably proactive strategy that just plays generic counter magic and generic removal spells can sort of get the job done right now.
Awesome. All right. So Stan, how do you rate it? Belief, sleeve?
Yeah. Oh, I'm a total believer. Not just because
Not a sleever?
Well, I have it in full art parallax, practically triple sleeve.
Importantly,
I even have the Delver and parallax now, so just to show people I mean business.
Love it.
I think it's cool. I think it's really cool that we got a couple good spells too, not just Delvers. The fact that we got Consider, the fact that we got Play with Fire, which is just better than Shock, the best Shock, and you should probably even be playing it in Phoenix and Historic. I've been playing a little bit of Phoenix too, just because of Consider being able to kind of replace Brainstorm and do a little bit of Thought Scour impression. I think that deck is actually a lot better than it's been recently. It's probably the best it's been since Brainstorm got banned, and that deck kind of died. Apparently got way less popular, and now the fact that you have Consider and being able to enable Stormwings with it, and sometimes binning a bird or a Faithless Looting is incredible.
I'm kind of surprised that these decks aren't running Faithless Looting just for value.
The Delver decks?
Yeah, I guess it doesn't really fit. You don't really have space for it, but...
Yeah, I think you just want to play mostly instants, and if you're going to play a sorcery, it has to be something that's really good for DRC. And I think the sorcery removal is better than Faithless Looting, which is just going to put you down a card.
And also, you really only have space for one draw spell in that sense, and so Expressive Iteration is just better, probably too.
Yeah, it's still just one of the best cards
ever
in the world. Yeah.
All right, awesome. Well, there you have it. It's our Sleeve Believe Heave for Innistrad Midnight Hunt. Consider this edition.
I wouldn't be surprised if we have another one of these, honestly.
I kind of think we're going to do another one next week. Let's see what happens over the next few days.
Yeah, guys, I got to tell you, I'm going to be in Wisconsin next week, so I'm going to miss another episode.
Audience, you've heard it here first.
Forgive me.
Stan's so busy having a kid, he's got to go to Wisconsin to escape.
Yeah, I got to introduce him to some cheese and beer while he's young, and I can still influence his palate.
What's the baby New Glarus beer? Is it
2 Sisters?
I was going to say Road Slush.
Not the cream ale? It's creamy. Dairy.
I mean, Spotted Cow is your beginner New Glarus beer. And then from there, you can get into the hard stuff.
And audience, I know that cream ales don't have cream in them. Okay. I know that.
I have some Midnight Hunt packs. I bought a pre-release box. Should I crack open some packs?
Stan, we're still recording the episode, right?
Yeah, of course. That's why I'm recommending we crack packs.
Anybody have any other things they would like to include in the episode? Let's see what you got. I opened a whole box the other night, honestly.
No.
Yeah, I opened a box of set boosters.
How'd you get the box? Oh, you did that thing where you can like buy at the pre-release or something?
I just went to the store near me, and they Grandmaster Games, Oak Park. The lands are beautiful. Have you all? I do think the lands are very cool. They're pretty hard to tell what land they are, but they look very from across the table. But they look very cool.
And it does wrap up this week's episode. If you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to our podcast so you get the latest episodes as soon as they come out. And if you use Apple Podcasts, please leave us a rating and review. If you'd like to submit a question to the podcast or just reach out to us in general, you can tweet us at The Dive Down, all one word. You can even email us, thedivedown@gmail.com. If you'd like to support the show, you can join our Patreon at patreon.com/thedivedown. It's how you get into our definitely discreet Discord dimension, where we chat all day about a variety of topics, from parenting to video games, Shane's nature photography. You're really developing a beautiful eye, by the way.
Thanks.
Shout out to ManaTraders for sponsoring our show. You can sign up for ManaTraders using promo code TheDiveDown2021 and support our podcast while playing Magic Online. Use the promo code to get 15% off your first 2 months of renting Magic Online cards. As always, special thanks to the bands Nowhere and Spaceblood for letting us use their music. And until next week, I can't yell. I have a sleeping child. Just get nightbound, people.
Get nightbound, people.
Get nightbound.
Get nightbound.